Envision a weapon of war, not of steel and shadow, but sculpted from the rich, deep grain of mahogany and sheathed in gleaming, ancient-looking polished brass, a vessel designed for lazy Sunday afternoons on the River Thames, suddenly thrust into the center of the greatest military disaster in British history. Picture a weekend pleasure cruiser, usually piloted by a banker or grocer, navigating through a sea slick with oil and blood, dodging magnetic mines while dive bombers scream overhead. This was not a standard naval operation. This was a desperate gamble, a frantic improvisation that defied every rule of warfare. In late May 1940, the fate of the free world did not rest on battleships or carriers, but on the fragile wooden hulls of civilian boats sailing straight into the mouth of hell. 338,000 lives hung in the balance, trapped on a strip of sand with the German war machine closing in for the kill. If you want to understand how a flotilla of fishing smacks, lifeboats, and yachts pulled off a miracle that generals deemed impossible, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel right now, because we are about to take you hour by hour through the smoke and fire of Dunkirk to witness the moment ordinary people became legends. The date is May 26, 1940. The location is a dynamo room, a tunnel complex buried deep within the chalk cliffs of Dover. Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay is staring at a map that spells the end of the British Empire. Across the English Channel, the British Expeditionary Force, the pride of the nation's military, has been shattered. Just 16 days prior, Hitler had unleashed his blitzkrieg on the west. The German Panzer divisions had sliced through the Ardennes, bypassed the Maginot Line, and raced to the sea, effectively cutting the Allied armies in half. The British, along with thousands of French and Belgian troops, have been pushed back, mile by bloody mile, until their backs are literally against the sea. They are trapped in a shrinking pocket around the ancient French port of Dunkirk. The Luftwaffe has air superiority. The German tanks are less than 15 miles away. The British government has been told to expect a catastrophe. Ramsay is given a grim order: evacuate who you can, but the Admiralty estimates that perhaps only 4,000 to 5,000 men can be saved before the Germans overrun the beaches. That is a death sentence for nearly a third of 1,000,000 men. If these men are lost, Britain is left undefended, and the war is effectively over. The problem facing Ramsay is one of simple, brutal geography. The harbor at Dunkirk is being pounded into rubble by German artillery and bombers. The docks are burning. The infrastructure is crumbling. But the bigger issue is the beach itself. The coastline at Dunkirk is shallow, shelving gently out into the sea. Large naval destroyers and transport ships cannot get close enough to the shore to pick up the men. They will run aground nearly a mile out. This leaves hundreds of thousands of soldiers standing on the sand, visible, exposed, and unreachable, while the deep-draft ships wait helplessly in the distance. The gap between the destroyers and the beach is a killing zone. To bridge that gap, Ramsay needs small craft. He needs shallow drafts. He needs boats that can float in just a few feet of water. And he needs them immediately. On May 14th, the BBC had broadcast a seemingly innocuous order. The Admiralty had made an order requesting all owners of self-propelled pleasure craft between 30 and 100 feet in length to send all particulars to the Admiralty within 14 days. Most people thought this was just bureaucratic record-keeping. It was not. It was a prelude to the most extraordinary maritime mobilization in history. By May 27th, the situation in France has deteriorated faster than anyone predicted. The Belgian army is on the brink of surrender, which will leave a gaping hole in the Allied defensive perimeter. The call goes out from the small vessels pool in London. Naval officers begin scouring the boatyards of the Thames, from Teddington to Sheerness. They walk into yacht clubs and boat sheds with a simple directive: we are taking your boat. They aren't asking for volunteers yet. They are requisitioning the vessels. They need anything that floats. Motor yachts, river launches, tugboats, fishing trawlers, cockle boats, barges, and lifeboats. They paint over the bright white hulls with battleship gray. They strip out the fine china and the cushions. They load them with fuel canisters and fresh water. But then, something unexpected happens. As the naval officers move to take command of these small ships to sail them across the channel, the owners step forward. These are men too old for the draft, men with families, civilians with zero combat training. They ask where their boats are going. When they realize the gravity of the situation, they refuse to hand over the keys. They say, if she's going to Dunkirk, I'm taking her. A wave of spontaneous mobilization sweeps through the civilian maritime community. You have bankers, dentists, fishermen, and engineers insisting on sailing into a war zone. One such vessel is the Sundowner, a motor yacht owned by Charles Lightoller. Lightoller is a 66-year-old retired sailor, but he isn't just any sailor. He was a second officer on the IMS Titanic and the most senior officer to survive the sinking. When the Admiralty phones him to requisition the Sundowner, Lightoller replies that if anyone is taking her over the channel, it will be him and his son. He strips the boat for action and prepares to sail. Their spirit replicates itself hundreds of times over. The little ships are born. By May 28th, the evacuation, codenamed Operation Dynamo, is underway, but it is failing. The harbor mole, a long stone and wood breakwater extending nearly a mile out to sea, is the only place where large ships can dock, but it is narrow and under constant air attack. The beaches are a scene of chaotic desperation. The German Luftwaffe, commanded by Hermann Göring, has promised Hitler that they can destroy the trapped army from the air, rendering a ground assault unnecessary. This decision, known as a halt order, gives the Allies a brief, critical respite from the tanks, but it turns the sky into a slaughterhouse. Stuka dive bombers scream down vertically, their sirens wailing to instill terror, dropping bombs on the assembled masses of men. The soldiers on the beach have no cover. They dig foxholes in the sand dunes, but sand offers no protection against high explosives. They are thirsty, exhausted, and running out of ammunition. They watch as ships attempting to enter the harbor are blown out of the water. The wreck of the Crested Eagle a paddle steamer, burns fiercely off the coast, sending a plume of black smoke into the sky that marks the location of the tragedy for miles. Into this inferno sail the little ships. They begin to arrive in numbers on May the 29th and 30th. They have crossed the English Channel, a stretch of water notorious for its treacherous currents even in peacetime. But now, the channel is a minefield. The Germans have laid magnetic mines that sit on the seabed and detonate when a metal hull passes over them. The civilian captains have no charts for the minefields. They simply have to follow the minesweepers or trust their luck. They navigate without lights to avoid being spotted by German E-boats, fast torpedo boats that prowl the darkness hunting for stragglers. The journey takes hours, the small engines straining, the boats overloaded with fuel jerry cans, essentially turning them into floating bombs. As they approach the French coast, the first thing that hits the crews is the smell. Long before they see the beaches, they smell the burning oil, the rotting livestock killed in the fields behind the town, and the cordite. Then they hear the noise, the incessant thud of artillery and the high-pitched whine of the Stukas. When the coast finally comes into view, it is a vision of apocalypse. The town of Dunkirk is a furnace. The oil storage tanks have been hit, creating a massive pool of black smoke that hangs low over the water, turning day into twilight. The sea is churned up by explosions. And on the beaches, stretching for miles from Dunkirk to La Panne and Bray Dunes, are the men. They look like black ants from a distance, but as the boats get closer, the crews see the reality. Long, serpentine lines of soldiers stand in the water, wading out until the sea is up to their necks, waiting for a boat. They stand there for hours, shivering, under fire, holding their rifles above their heads to keep them dry. The method of rescue is grueling and dangerous. The destroyers and large personnel carriers anchor in the deep water a mile or so offshore. The little ships act as a ferry service. They run the gauntlet to the beach, grounding themselves in the shallows. The soldiers, desperate and exhausted, have to climb or be hauled over the gunwales. These are not agility-trained commandos. These are men who have been marching and fighting for weeks, many of them wounded, all of them dead on their feet. The small boats load as many as they can carry, sometimes 20, sometimes 50, until the freeboard is only inches above the water. Then they turn around, struggling against the tide, and head back to the destroyers. They offload the men, climbing up scramble nets on the steel sides of the warships, and then, despite the fatigue, despite the terror, the civilian crews turn their small boats around and go back to the beach. Again, and again, and again. Take the story of the Tamsin, a tiny fishing boat less than 15 feet long. It is the smallest boat to take part in the evacuation. It crosses the channel, bobs like a cork in the wake of destroyers, and ferries men from the shallows to the largest ships. It is so small it shouldn't even be in open water, let alone a war zone. Then there's the Medway Queen, a paddle steamer that makes 7 round trips across the channel, rescuing 7,000 men. Her crew works until they pass out from exhaustion, fueled only by tea and adrenaline. There's a fireboat Massey Shore manned by London firefighters who had never been to sea. They originally go to fight the fires on the ships, but end up rescuing men. At one point, the Massey Shore retrieves troops from the water and finds itself so overloaded that it can barely steer. The danger is not just from the enemy. The collisions are frequent. In the dark, with no lights, amidst the chaos of hundreds of vessels maneuvering in tight spaces, wooden hulls are smashed by steel ones. Propellers get fouled on debris and floating equipment. And the wake of the fast destroyers can easily capsize a small yacht. But the discipline holds. The Royal Navy officers organizing the beach parties, the men standing in the water directing the loading, maintain order with revolvers and megaphones. Queues of men stood like statues in the water, one skipper recalled. When a boat arrives, there is no mob rush. The men wait their turn. They help the wounded on first. The famous British stiff upper lip is not a myth here. It is a survival mechanism. Panic would mean death for everyone. May 31st is a turning point. The weather, which had been miraculously calm, a phenomenon now known as Hitler's weather in reverse, or the Dunkirk weather favoring the British, remains flat. If a storm had blown up, the little ships would have been swamped instantly. The sea is like a mill pond, shrouded in the smoke that actually helps hide the ships from the German bombers. On this day alone, over 68,000 men are lifted off the beaches and the mole. The sheer volume of traffic is staggering. It is a maritime traffic jam. There are Dutch coasters, Belgian fishing boats, French destroyers, and the endless swarm of British civilian craft. However, the Luftwaffe intensifies its attacks on June 1st. This is the blackest day of the evacuation. The Germans realize the British are escaping. Goring throws everything he has at the fleet. The sky fills with Stukas. The destroyer HMS Basilisk is hit and sinks. The HMS Keith is sunk. The French destroyer Foudroyant capsizes. The passenger ferry Scotia carrying thousands of French troops, is bombed. As the men flounder in the oil-slick water, German planes strive for survivors. It is a scene of absolute horror. Yet, the little ships ignore the danger. They steam into the oil slicks to pull men out. They maneuver under falling bombs. The Sundowner piloted by Lightoller, packs 130 men into a yacht designed for 21. On the way back, they are attacked by enemy aircraft. Lightoller, using his decades of experience handling ships in rough seas, watches the Stuka dive. As the bomb is released, he waits for the last second and slams the helm over. The boat turns sharply, and the bomb explodes harmlessly in the water where there had been moments before. He does this repeatedly, dodging death by seconds, eventually delivering every single man safely to Ramsgate. As the days blur into nights, the crews of the little ships begin to hallucinate from lack of sleep. They have been operating for days without rest, living on sandwiches and Benzodrine. Their eyes are red-rimmed, their hands blistered. But the flow of men continues. The soldiers they pick up are often in a state of shock. Some have discarded their rifles. Others clutch them like security blankets. They are covered in a mixture of sand, oil, and sweat. When they are finally hauled onto the little boats, many simply collapse on the deck and fall asleep instantly, oblivious to the roaring engines or the falling shells. The civilians offer them cigarettes, chocolate, whatever they have. For many soldiers, the sight of a familiar London river bus or weekend yacht is the first sign that they haven't been abandoned, that home has come to get them. By June 2nd, the British rearguard begins to leave. The perimeter is shrinking rapidly. The Germans are capturing the outer defenses. The hospitals in Dunkirk are left behind with doctors drawing lots to stay with the wounded who cannot be moved. The evacuation shifts almost entirely to night operations to avoid the deadly air attacks. The little ships, lacking radar and advanced navigation, have to feel their way through the darkness. The mole is a twisted ruin, but ships still tie up alongside the jagged concrete. The final phase involved the rescue of the French. Churchill insists that the French troops who held the line to allow the British to escape must be rescued. Bras de fer, arm in arm, is the motto. The little ships return to the Hell's Cape one last time. The beaches are now strewn with the wreckage of an army, thousands of trucks, tanks, and artillery pieces rendered useless and abandoned. The sand is littered with greatcoats, helmets, and the bodies of those who didn't make it. On the night of June 3rd and the early morning of June 4th, the last major efforts are made. The destroyer HMS Shikari is the last ship to leave a mole at 3:40 a.m. on June 4th. The German army enters the town hours later, capturing the remaining 40,000 French troops who fought until the ammunition ran out. When the little ships finally limp back to the port of Ramsgate, Dover, and Margate, they are battered and scarred. Their hulls are riddled with bullet holes and shrapnel. Their engines are shot. But as they pull into the English harbors, they are met not with the silence of defeat, but with the cheers of a nation. The soldiers, disembarking onto the railway platforms, expect to be jeered. They feel they have failed. They have been driven off the continent, but the crowds press food and tea into their hands. They are hailed as heroes. The Dunkirk spirit is born in this moment, the idea that the British people, when backed into a corner, will improvise, endure, and pull together to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. The statistics are staggering. The Admiralty hoped for 45,000. Operation Dynamo saved 338,226 men. Of those, the little ships are credited with rescuing approximately 26,000 directly from the beaches, but their true contribution was a ferry service that allowed the larger ships to load tens of thousands more. Without the little ships bridging that gap between the shallow beach and the deep water, the evacuation would have stalled, and the casualty count would have been catastrophic. Furthermore, the psychological impact was immeasurable. The sight of those civilian boats boosted the morale of the trapped army. It told them, "You are not forgotten." But the cost was high. Over 200 civilian vessels were lost. They were blown apart by mines, smashed by bombs, or simply run into the ground until they could run no more. Many civilian sailors died alongside the soldiers they were trying to save. They were not trained for war, yet they faced the full fury of the Luftwaffe with nothing but wooden hulls and courage. To understand the scale of what happened, you have to look at the specifics of the boats that survived. The Bluebird of Chelsea a yacht that had once hosted high society parties, returned with its cabin soaked in blood. The Count Dracula a launch owned by a German admiral before the First World War and salvaged by the British, ironically helped save British troops from Germans. The sheer variety of the flotilla, lifeboat from liners, Dutch eel boats, Thames-sailing barges with their red ochre sails, painted a picture of a nation throwing everything it had into the fight. The aftermath of Dunkirk reshaped the war. The British Army had lost almost all its heavy equipment. Tanks, artillery, transport were all left in France. The army that returned was unarmed and disorganized. But the men, the core of the professional army, were saved. These men would form the backbone of the force that would eventually return to Europe on D-Day 4 years later. If the little ships had not sailed, Britain would have lost its army. If Britain had lost its army, it likely would have been forced to sue for peace. There would have been no Battle of Britain, no North African campaign, no D-Day. The map of the world would look very different today. We must also look at the technical improvisation that occurred during those 9 days. Engineers on the shore in England were working around the clock to repair the boats that returned damaged, patching holes and fixing engines so they could turn around and go back within hours. It was a logistical miracle as much as a tactical one. The fuel supplies, the coordination of hundreds of unlisted civilian craft, the charting of the mine-swept channels, all organized in a damp tunnel under Dover by men who hadn't slept in a week. One of the most poignant images of the evacuation is a peal of trucks. On the beaches, where the water was too shallow even for the little ships to get right up to the sand, the Royal Engineers drove lines of trucks into the sea at low tide, parking them bumper to form makeshift jetties. They laid wooden planks across the tops of the trucks. The soldiers walked along the precarious paths, out into the deeper water where the boats could reach them. It was a symbol of the desperate ingenuity that defined the entire operation. As the operation concluded, Winston Churchill stood before the House of Commons on June 4, 1940. He delivered his famous speech, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds." But he also issued a word of caution. He reminded the nation that wars are not won by evacuations. Dunkirk was a defeat, a colossal military disaster. Yet, The rescue was a victory of the human spirit. It was a victory of the civilian over the totalitarian. The German war machine was efficient, ruthless, and professional. The British response was chaotic, amateur, and emotional. And somehow, the amateurs won the race. The legacy of the little ships endures today. The Association of Dunkirk Little Ships preserves the remaining vessels. Every 5 years, the surviving boats, now over 80 years old, make the commemorative crossing from Ramsgate to Dunkirk. They are piloted by the descendants of the original owners or by naval enthusiasts committed to keeping the history alive. To see them crossing the channel is to see living history. These are not museum exhibits behind glass. They are working vessels that bear the scars of 1940. Think about the men on those beaches. Think about the thirst. The water supplies in Dunkirk had been destroyed. Men were drinking from ditches or straining radiator water from abandoned trucks. The discipline they maintain while suffering from extreme dehydration is hard to comprehend. And then, appearing out of the mist, comes a pleasure boat named the Asterisk Lorna Doone Asterisk or the Asterisk Lady Hague Asterisk, tossing bottles of water to them. That connection, that moment of humanity amidst the inhumanity of industrial warfare, is the heart of the Dunkirk story. It is also worth noting the role of the INLI, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. 19 lifeboats were sailed to Dunkirk by their crews. These boats were designed to save lives in storms, not under fire. The lifeboat men, volunteers from coastal villages, sailed directly into the bombardment. The Ramsgate Lifeboat Asterisk Prudential Asterisk loaded 2,800 men onto larger ships and brought 160 home directly. The sheer physical endurance required to muscle these heavy boats through the surf, hour after hour, is a testament to the toughness of the maritime community. We often focus on the miracle, but we must remember the chaos. There were moments of panic. There were boats that were swamped by men too desperate to wait. There were arguments and confusion in the dock. But the overriding narrative is one of cooperation. Strangers pulled strangers from the water. Civilians obeyed naval orders without question. Soldiers, who had seen their units disintegrated, found new structure in the queues on the sand. The evacuation also featured the first major clashes between the IAF and the Luftwaffe. While the soldiers on the beach cursed the IAF, "Where's the bloody Air Force?" The air battles were taking place inland, away from the beaches, where Spitfires and Hurricanes were intercepting the German bomber formations. The RAF lost 145 aircraft defending the evacuation. Without their sacrifice, the little ships would have been sitting ducks. The Luftwaffe was kept at bay just enough to allow the slow-moving armada to operate. As we look back on this event, we have to ask ourselves, would this happen today? If the call went out for civilians to take their family cars or private boats into a war zone to save the army, would the response be the same? The generation of 1940 had a sense of duty that overrode personal safety. The owners of the little ships didn't sign contracts. They didn't ask for insurance. They simply went. They saw the smoke on the horizon. They knew their boys were trapped, and they fired up the engines. The story of the little ships is a story of the Mosquito Armada. It's a story of how quantity has a quality all its own. One fishing boat can save 20 men. One destroyer can save 500. But 700 little boats, swarming back and forth, creates a lifeline that cannot be easily severed by bombs. It decentralized the target. The Germans could sink a destroyer, but they couldn't sink 700 tiny targets bobbing in the waves. The swarm baffled the enemy. The pilots of the Stukas looked down and saw the sea crawling with beetles. They didn't know where to drop their bombs to have the most impact. When the operation finally ceased, the silence that fell over Dunkirk was heavy. The Germans captured the equipment, the coastline, and the remaining French defenders. But the prize, the British Army, was gone. They were in England, regrouping, rearming, and preparing to return. The little ships returned to their moorings on the Thames, the Medway, and the southern ports. They were cleaned up, the grey paint eventually scraped off, and they returned to being pleasure craft. But they were different. They carried a ghost history. A plaque was often attached to the bulkhead, Dunkirk 1940. So, the next time you see a small wooden boat chugging down a river, look closely. It might be a veteran of the greatest escape in history. It might be a vessel that once carried 50 shivering soldiers away from the burning beaches of France. The little ships of Dunkirk remind us that when the world is falling apart, help can come from the most unlikely places. They remind us that there is no such thing as just a civilian when humanity is on the line. The evacuation of Dunkirk was not a miracle in the divine sense. It was a miracle of effort, grit, and solidarity. It was a result of thousands of individual decisions to do the right thing when it was easier to do nothing. From Vice Admiral Ramsey in the tunnels to the teenage deckhand on a fishing smack, everyone played their part. The result was 338,000 lives saved. 338,000 fathers, sons, brothers, and husbands who came home. 338,000 seeds of the future victory. If this story of courage and survival moved you, please share this video. The story of the little ships needs to be kept alive. It is a testament to what people can achieve when they unite for a common cause. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the history that shaped our world. The past is filled with stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and we are here to tell them. Until next time, remember the little ships.